Oh, hello. Welcome back to the fairest realm. Welcome to my elfin workshop. Welcome to my home studio. I get up to all kinds of fun and creative projects around here. My name is Faith. I'm your local fairy godmother. I'm your favorite stitch witch, and I'm here to inspire you to live your life as creatively as possible. Today we're going to do something a little different. Instead of working on a project here in the Elfin Workshop, we are going to hit the road and go on a field trip together, because recently I got to go to something very cool called Flax Fest in New Hampshire. And this experience blew my mind, and I really want to share it with you because I know so many of us don't have access to an event like this, or maybe have never heard of such a thing, or don't have this in your area. So I tried to capture as much of the magic of this day as possible to share it with you now in video form, because I learned so much about the history of clothing and how we create these fibers to create garments for ourselves. So today's episode is brought to you by the flax plant. This is her in her dried glory. You can see the little roots, and out of the stalk comes this amazing fiber that gets spun and woven into fabrics for textiles. So we're calling in the spirit of flax today as we dive into our past to discover all the wisdom and magic that we can bring into the future. So grab your favorite beverage and let's hit the road together. What a beautiful morning it is. Look at all these rainbows we have. I just got in the car. I'm going to be driving up to New Hampshire today for something called Flax Fest, which I'm very excited about. It seems there will be some demonstrations of heritage creative processes. For instance, the tradition of planting flax, cultivating it, spinning the fibers, and weaving it into fabric. So my friend Steph and I are going to check this out because it's hard to come by this wisdom. We don't pass it down these days as much as we used to. So this feels like a really special, albeit all too rare, opportunity to learn about these processes that humans have been doing a very long time, and they've almost gotten lost to us. But we are here to make sure they do not get lost. We are here to re-embody that ancient wisdom and bring it into the future. So here we go. I'm in the Faerie mobile. I have a couple-hour drive ahead of me. I'll be stopping for coffee, of course, because we are ladies of luxury and we treat ourselves so well because, we get sent on all these fairy missions. And the whole point is to have fun and play and have the most delightful time we can while we are on these assignments. So I'm bringing you along with me on my day. And it already feels very magical. I mean, look at this light show. This is just getting in the car in the morning. Girl, there's just so much beauty around us all the time. We can just open our eyes to see it. So we arrived at this beautiful historical farm at the end of a long dirt road, and it was instantly so charming. It was also a gorgeous day out, so we got really lucky. So I went with my friend Stephanie, who's an herbalist and a gardener, and she has her own apothecary called Gate and Garden Herbals. And she's just amazing because she develops really deep relationships with every plant she works with. And so the spirit of flax has been calling Miss Stephanie. And actually, Stephanie recently found a spinning wheel on Facebook Marketplace. So she is beginning this journey of learning how to plant a seed, cultivate a plant, harvest this plant, process it for the fibers, spin it, and then weave it and create fabric, and then sew the fabric into something. That is a mystical journey if I've ever heard of one. So big shout out to Miss Stephanie, because she's the one that found out about this Flax Fest. She was up at her family's lake home in New Hampshire and was reading the local newspaper of all things and came across this listing for Flax Fest, which she had never heard of, I had never heard of, and quite honestly, if we had just been searching on the internet, we may never have found it, because it literally wasn't listed on the internet. It was in the local paper. And that's the thing about living this life of magic, is that when you look for the clues and the signs, they're everywhere. And so, of course, after a spinning wheel arrived in her life, she would be given the next breadcrumb on the trail, which was this experience of Flax Fest, where we could go and receive this wisdom from this elder generation that's been carrying these practices. And we can receive it as the next generation and embody this wisdom and make sure it doesn't get lost. So right away when we arrived, it felt like stepping back in time, because you had so many people in historically accurate garb, if you will, which is always such a pleasure to see when someone commits that thoroughly to embodying a tradition, that they really dress up for it and actually help immerse us in that time and place that we're engaging with. I mean, it literally felt like we were back in time. Who needs a time machine when you can visit one of these heritage festivals? So we began this immersive learning experience by meeting flax in her plant form. We went over to the patch of land where the flaxseed had been sown, and we could see these beautiful, tall, green plants. And this is what the flax looks like when she's almost ready to be harvested. We had an amazing guide from the Historical Society. Her name is Lori, and she shared with us how to work with it, how to plant it, a little bit of the history. There was some kind of blacksmithing demonstration happening behind her, so it was a little loud in the background for some of the video that I captured.
To save the property. However, raising one.
But what she was saying here is that in 2011, this property almost went for sale to a developer. They had the lines and the plots all drawn out to put up condos and buildings on this historical site. But luckily, as part of the final surveying process, they discovered this historical pond on the property, and they realized this was a man-made pond. So they already knew that this farm was historic. They just hadn't discovered the pond element. So once the man-made pond was discovered in the woods, they had to put a halt to this property transaction. And what they would come to discover is that this is the one and only historically preserved pond for processing flax in the whole state of New Hampshire. So this was really exciting news. And the whole town banded together and raised $1.2 million to save the land from going to this developer. So now this land is protected by the Historical Society. So we now know that there were families living here in the 1600s, planting and growing flax and processing fiber. This was so interesting to learn about, because I realized how close we can come to losing so much history. I mean, this is now a through line that is preserved through this farm and this property, understanding the history of it, and now having a group of people that are stewarding this land and protecting the heritage. But until its history was even known, this land came so close to being bulldozed, and all this history and knowledge could have been lost forever. So thank you to the Gilmanton Historical Society for all the work that you've done in reclaiming this land and helping preserve the history. So our wonderful guide Lori was sharing with us how easy it is to grow flax.
Flax is a 100-day crop. You prep your soil, which requires very little, but you just want to prep a growth plot. You actually just scatter the seeds, you hand sow them. So you don't plant rows, you just hand scatter your seeds. And then what I do is I just rake it in a little bit, just to stir up the soil around it, water it, and then you let it go. Root system is very shallow, and so up it grows, it germinates very quickly. And what the best growing method is to sow it very heavily so that the plants are growing close together to push out and discourage weeds. What we really want to achieve with the flax is to be a very tall, thin, and non-branching. It can branch at the top to form your seed heads. So if you want a seed save for the next year, you can go ahead and do that. If you look at one of these, right, so we want just the branching at the top. And if there's too much space in between the plants, many varieties will start to branch. This variety, Lisette, recently developed in France, is sort of the hot new fiber flax, not a dual purpose, not a food grade, that a lot of us are trying for the first time this year. And I'm really happy with it. But we'll see how it processes to fiber. This is last year's, this is avian, and so I've grown a few different varieties, and there is a little basket in the barn that has the samples, because I take a sample each year.
So even if you're not a very experienced gardener, this could be a seed that you start working with. One of my favorite facts that I learned about flax is how shallow the roots are. So this is the whole entire root system. It's not even an inch high, and the plant itself is many, many, many inches high. So for such a tall plant to have such a short little root, it tells me this is a plant that is literally saying, use me, I'm easy to pluck, I'm here to be your fiber. It's like the plant is collaborating with us to make it easy to pluck and to harvest and to turn into fiber. It truly feels like the plant itself has made it easier for us. After visiting the patch of flax where it was growing, we all walked over to the retting pond. So retting, this is the part of the process that breaks the plant down to release the fibers. So the word retting, I believe, comes from a Dutch word which means rot or rotting. It's allowing water to come into contact with the plant, fresh or dried, and the bacteria that's created through the moisture sort of eats away at the outer stalk and helps break it down to then be used as the fibers. So there's two ways of retting flax. One is with dew. So you can actually cut the flax, lay it down in the field, and allow the dew to naturally do her thing. No pun intended. So that's one way to work with the moisture and the plant. Apparently this takes a lot longer because there's only so much dew in the morning. And whereas if you have access to a body of water like a river or a stream, you can soak the whole plant in quite a lot of water, and the process seems to be quicker that way. But either way will suffice. So this is why this family created this pond on their land and dug out the earth to create a body of water so they could take the flax from their fields and lay it in the water. And they weigh it down with some stones, and essentially you just keep checking on it until it's at the right stage where the fibers are beginning to emerge. So this tough husk starts to break down and break away and reveal the soft fibers within the stalks. And the amazing thing about this fiber is how strong it is. I mean, I'm like really putting pressure, like pulling it right now, and it's not going anywhere. So you can see why humans would have discovered that this is fiber, because I mean, you don't have to do much and she's already revealing her potential as a material. After the flax has been retted, the next step in the process is called rippling. So this is when you're using some kind of pressure to break up the husk of the plant. And essentially the technology is as simple as a couple boards or planks with a hinge or a screw. And that actually works really well to process the hemp. And then the next phase is scutching and hetchling. 2 words I was not familiar with. Essentially, the fiber is becoming finer and finer as you go. So it's being separated, it's being softened, it's being refined. And after these processes, it turns into almost like a baby hair. It's very soft, beautiful. And then it's ready to be spun. So the spinning process feels very magical to me, because this is when you're taking raw plant material that's been somewhat processed, but is still to this point a raw plant material. And through spinning, you are then twisting that raw material into a thread, essentially. So you're adding a spiral, you're adding a twist. This is the spinning process. And there are 2 ways to spin. You can spin with a wheel. This is like the spinning wheel that my friend Stephanie found on Facebook Marketplace, which started this journey. And it's interesting because the technology of the spinning wheel hasn't necessarily been improved upon. I mean, we figured out how to mechanize it, make it more industrial, but it's still the same essential process of the spinning wheel. And whether you operate it by hand or whether you operate it through electricity, it's the same principle, which is fascinating because this is a very ancient technique. We have been spinning for as long as we know. So you have the spinning wheel, and then the second way of spinning is with a hand bobbin, which I had never seen before. So this was really cool to learn about. And there was actually a spinning bee. It was a little competition to see who could spin the longest strand on a hand bobbin. So that was a lot of fun. The contestants had 20 minutes, spin, spin, spin their fiber into a strand, and then to see who spun the longest yarn. And then after you've spun your fiber into the spiral, it's ready to weave on a loom into fabric. So I'm sure you've seen a loom before. Essentially, you have fibers going one way and then other fibers going perpendicular. So essentially, you'll get like a weave. And they did have an old loom set up in the barn, which was so cool to see, and honestly a little overwhelming because there's so many moving parts. I'm not sure it's something that's up my alley personally, but I absolutely love to see this art of weaving being continued. And then once you have your fibers woven into the fabric, then it's time to dye it and add color. So there was a whole natural dyeing station set up at Flax Fest, sharing about all the plants you can use and all the colors that they offer. So we talked about marigold and the bright yellows, and we talked about madder root and the beautiful reds and oranges. And these are the plants that are still around us today, which is really cool as a way to connect with our ancestors, to dye our clothing and our fabrics the same way that they would have. So for me, the highlight of this whole day was learning about how growing our own fibers is directly related to sovereignty. And here's what I mean. So I learned that the early settlers who came to New England from Europe, these were families and farmers who were trying to make a life for themselves and live off the land. And one of the things that these settlers wanted to do was to grow and process their own fibers. But at this time, they were still ruled by England, even though they had left England. The long, strong arm of the government was reaching into this new world, and England was telling the settlers that they had to buy their fabrics from England. They literally were not allowed to grow their own fibers or create their own fabrics. And so, of course, all of these tensions would go on to heighten and create the Revolutionary War, because this group of scrappy farmers were saying, hey, we want to be sovereign, we want to be self-sufficient, we can grow this flax on our land, we can clothe our bodies, our families from what we can grow from the ground. Like, let us do this, we know how to do this. And England said, no, you need to buy our products, to pay the taxes on these imported goods. And this was one of the factors that led to the Revolutionary War. And I learned that during this process of building the army to stand up to England, these farmers turned soldiers needed to clothe themselves. So the women of these villages, the women of these communities got together and said, okay, we are going to be the rebels. We are going to be the renegades. We are going to plant these contraband seeds. We are going to grow our own fibers. We are going to create our own fabrics to clothe our soldiers who are standing up to an oppressive system. Ooh! Snaps for that, because yes, I love that energy. And I learned that one of these renegade groups of women that got together, they called themselves the Noble-Hearted Nymphs. And their mission was to use their resourcefulness to fight for sovereignty. And to me, this was the highlight of the whole day. My biggest takeaway is that when we remember these practices of the ancient future, how to grow our own food, how to grow our own fibers, how to clothe ourselves in a sustainable way that is not contributing to an oppressive system, we have freedom. We hear so much bad news today about the fashion industry. We know that we've been in a state of overconsumption. We know it's been really harmful to our bodies and our planets, but we don't hear enough about the good news that's right here in our own history. We know how to do this. We can remember how to grow our own fabrics. We've got this. The seeds of our sovereignty are right under our nose. So thank you for watching this, because you are one of these noble-hearted nymphs who is helping to make sure that these ancient techniques do not get lost, but are remembered and embodied in the here and now. And once we understand these ancient techniques of feeding ourselves and clothing ourselves, we can innovate and bring new ideas and new ways of creating. So if you're watching this, you are definitely someone who is here to create this new world that our hearts know is possible, because we remember. So thank you for joining me for this little fairy field trip. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have this beautiful experience of diving into the ancient future and recapturing and reclaiming this wisdom and bringing it forward. Until next time, I'll see you soon.